Hello and welcome to this presentation on compensation and job evaluation. I believe that throughout the entire tenure in this program, this class is the only exposure that you'll have to these topics. I don't plan to give a thorough coverage of these, but just to give the quick highlights, and then if you would like to get into more detail, feel free to check out this book. It's by Milkovic and Newman, and it's titled Compensation, and I like it because it's very easy to follow, gives step-by-step instructions, integrates the research where appropriate, and I have no doubt that you could pick it up if you were in an HR role and needed to start doing a job evaluation from scratch with no experience, that you could do it with this book. So I just want to make you aware of that. Okay, so the topics that I will cover are first defining what job evaluation is, the major decisions that you'll face when you're doing it, and then the three types of very widely used JE. And I won't go through all of the steps involved, but just enough so that you get the basic idea. Okay, so what we're doing when we're doing JE is creating structures. And I want you to know the definition of job evaluation, and it's the process of systematically determining the relative worth of the various jobs or positions in the organization to the organization. So when we are doing a job evaluation, we're creating a job structure for the org. The evaluation is based on a combination of the following factors. So we have the content of the job itself. What does the job require? And that is information, remember, from job analysis. Skills required, same thing. The value to the organization. So if this position were eliminated, what would be the impact on the organization as a whole? What about the organization's culture, mission? The strategy of the org. How does that play into this? And then finally, the external market. So the value of the job content is based on what it can command in the labor market overall. So that's the external link. And when we are creating pay structures, of course, we want to make sure that they are competitive so that we can keep our talent in the org. So the purpose of job evaluation, again, is to organize a job structure in the organization, communicate it to stakeholders, and I'm just going to make a quick correction here. I didn't realize. Just editing on the fly here. All right, so also what job evaluation does is it provides a basis for determining base pay, or at least a starting point for what we're going to have as a base pay for the different positions in the org. When we do it effectively, we're going to follow accomplish the following objectives. We're going to support the organization's mission and support the workflow and hopefully help people do their job more efficiently. We want to foster fairness to the employees and motivate behavior toward those objectives that we want realized for the org. Okay, so step one in the JE process is to determine benchmark jobs. So JE can't be done on all positions at once in an org, especially if the organization is large and complex. So what benchmarking does is it gives us a starting point. We're going to prioritize the most significant jobs, and we will classify those first, and then work toward classifying the other jobs that aren't quite as substantial in terms of their impact on the org's outcomes. So we're going to select these significant or benchmark jobs. We're going to group the jobs into families or categories with similar content in terms of what they require on a day-to-day basis. And then inside each of the categories, we're going to select those benchmark jobs. So characteristics of a good benchmark job, what are those? Well, first, it has to be well known in the organization, and the job content remains fairly stable over time. So it's not a job that's fluid, changing in its requirements, and so that, you know, it basically is a long-standing position that that, and I would say it's one that the employee can't easily change it either, and I think those are becoming more rare in today's workforce, but there still are many positions that just by their very nature remain fairly stable over time. The job is common across various employees or various employers, sorry. So that means that if you're an engineer in this organization, you're doing fairly similar work to an engineer in a different org. Maybe a org with similar goals and strategies, but it's still a different org than the one that we are focally interested in. And finally, reasonable number of incumbents are in the position. So it's not one that has just 2 or 3 people in it, but there's a critical mass of individuals. Okay, so here's an example. I think the organization is Lockheed Martin, and again, this is an example from this book, Compensation by Milkovic and Newman, and they show this little diagram here with these different classifications. In the org, first we have the managerial group here on the left, and we are going to pick the benchmark jobs, VPs and supervisors. Now notice we have other categories here, but we are going to save them for later. We're not going to include them in the benchmark jobs. Maybe there are only a few people in these, maybe they're not as important to the org strategy, so we are going to leave them for now and focus on the ones that are more significant in terms of their impact. Same with the technical group. So we've selected 3 benchmarks. These are shaded a little bit darker. The senior associate, scientist, etc. And then the manufacturing group, we've selected our benchmarks for that. And then finally the administrative group, we have more benchmarks here. Okay, so here's the note, more heavily shaded jobs have been selected as benchmarks. All right, so once we have those benchmarks, we're going to do a ranking of those. So what it does is it orders job descriptions from highest to lowest based on a definition of the relative value or contribution to the org success. Okay, so we're going to take those benchmark jobs and rank them in terms of how much do they impact the org's strategy. Okay, so this is a simple one. People, I think, use this one as a go-to for the method of job evaluation that's fairly easy to explain and understand. It's not as easy to do. However, there's one thing to say about this, and that is that this method can be subjective and misleading because when we're just doing the ranking, the criteria on which the jobs are ranked are not always understood even by the SMEs who are doing the ranking. Typically those are the people who do them. And people have bias who do this, right? Because if they believe maybe certain jobs that they've done in the past are more valuable to the org, they believe, just because they have been involved in those positions. So there are some things that can come into play here. People don't always agree on what factors add value to the organization. And so, and of course, which positions really reflect those attributes that do add value. Sometimes there's some disagreement there. Sometimes raters don't know enough about all the jobs in the organization to even be able to compare them meaningfully, so that's also a common critique of this method. Okay, so we have different approaches to ranking. We have simple ranking, where the SMEs use their judgment and they just simply rank these 10 or 15 or more different positions in terms of, okay, this one is the most value, adds the most value to the org's bottom line or success, efficiency, whatever we're looking at as our criterion. Then this one is the second most valuable, and on down the line, and of course the bottom one is the one that, you know, if this position were to go away, the organization would not be impacted as much. And this is a very cognitively tasking method, as you can imagine. The more positions that you have to order in that manner, the more difficult it is. Alternation ranking is the next one, and this is making things a little bit easier in terms of cognitive resources. Basically, the SMEs determine which jobs or positions are most and then least valuable, so they do the two ends, and then the second most valuable and the second least valuable, and so on, and they work toward the middle. And so some people think that's more accurate, although I think that's debatable. The paired comparison method, which I will show you, is a systematic method where people compare all possible pairs of positions and rank them. And this one is a little bit easier to do, and it's more reliable and replicable, I would say, than some of these other methods. So I will show you that here coming up. Here's an example of a paired comparison ranking in which we have different positions here on the diagonal, and then we have the other positions up here on the horizontal, and basically for each pair the SME is deciding which one is most valuable to the organization. So between shear operator and electrician, they're saying the electrician's most important. Between the electrician and this one, the punch press person, it's the electrician again. Between the shear operator and the punch press, it's the shear operator. Okay, so you can see how this is done, and then it's very systematic in the sense that we count up how many each position has. So the shear operator got 3, rated as most important. The electrician got 4 total, and on down the line. And then we're going to have a rank ordering of who's most important. So it looks like the master welder got the most, and they got 5. And then the electrician got 4, and so on. So this is a way to, again, if you have 100 different positions, you take each possible pair, and that way everyone is, the SMEs are only comparing 2 against each other, and then rather than trying to think about all of them, and it's just helpful that way. Okay, job evaluation method number 2. So we have the ranking methods, and now we have the classification methods. And this one's fairly straightforward. This is an example that the authors of the book used with Clark Consulting, and they were consulting with Lockheed Martin again. And basically what we do is we break up the job families into categories. In this case, we have engineers, and then we have engineer managers, and different levels within those. And so we have class 1 is an engineer, and class 2 is the engineer manager, and then within those we have engineer 1, 2, 3, etc. And we have these descriptions of what each level does. Okay, so Milkovic and Newman say to create this structure we look for natural breaks in the work content, look for positions where basically it's an individual contributor versus maybe a project lead versus the leader of 2 or more groups, so you're looking at responsibility level, and of course you want to pay people probably who have more responsibility, like engineer manager 3 has the most responsibility, and probably more things will go wrong if that person doesn't do their job well than an engineer manager 1 or an engineer 1, for example. So this method can produce a simple or complex structure as you want, basically, as the organization needs, and it still requires some time and effort to think through how many do you want. Do you want 10 levels, just 3 levels? I would say, just my view, unless the organization is very large, err on the side of parsimony, because it's harder to make those distinctions. And just for fairness and for legal purposes, if you're going to make pay grades based on these, you want to make sure that it's clear to the employees what is required to be able to attain that pay level. And so these are just examples, and I know this is difficult to read. You can expand it and read it on your own. but I don't want you to get lost in the details, but just to know that this is one example of many. But if you're actually doing this, it's important to think through that this may become part of the organization's public record, and employees are looking at this to determine, am I performing at this level? Does this job require this level? And so I know that these are the things I'll be doing in order to attain that pay. Okay, moving along. Job evaluation method 3 is the point method, and this is the most rigorous approach. The ranking method and the classification method take a lot of time, but they are not super, I would say, scientific necessarily, but this one is. And so it has this quantification process, and it's multiple steps that I'll walk you through. First, we're going to determine the compensable factors and know what compensable factors are for the point method. They are basically characteristics in the work that is done in the various positions that the org will value. So it's decided it's going to value these specific things, and those are the things that we want workers to do that enable the org to pursue its strategy and be successful, basically. Okay, so there are 6 steps to this method. First, conduct a job analysis, which is usually the first step in just about everything we do in IO. And second, we determine the compensable factors that we want to reward people for doing. We're going to scale the factors, so which ones are more important than others. Weight the factors in terms of their importance to every particular position. Then we want to communicate the plan, train users on the plan, prepare manuals or whatever else we need to communicate to the stakeholders what we're doing. And then after we are done with the benchmark jobs, we're going to apply these compensable factors and all of these different steps to the non-benchmark jobs. Okay, so step 1, do your JA. JA, very important, of course. So you take your representative sample of jobs, take your significant benchmark jobs, and you're going to define and scale and weight these compensable factors. Okay, so how do we do that? First, we're going to look at what compensable factors should be. They should be based on the strategy and values of the org. So what do we really want our employees to be engaging in? What are the most important behaviors and skills that we need? They're based on the work that's that is to be performed, and it's good to have documentation of this from the job analysis. Make sure that this is legally defensible, and we want to involve the stakeholders, involve the incumbents in the jobs, and make sure that they are on board and that everything is clearly defined and agreed upon to some extent. Of course, we know from job analysis literature that that is an ongoing and challenging goal. I know this is difficult to read, but you can expand it. I've expanded it here about as much as I can. This is an example from the book, and this is the compensable factor of decision making. So this organization, and I don't recall which organization this was, but in this example, but this organization decided that they are going to reward the skill of decision making, and it's going to determine how decision making is going to relate to pay. So like any good like measure, basically indicator, we need to define it. And so the compensable factor definition is right here, and it says something like evaluates the extent of required decision making and the beneficial or detrimental effect such decisions would have on the profitability of the org. Consideration is given to the first, risk and complexity of required decision making and impact such action would have on the company. So this organization has decided that those are going to who are paid more are going to be making decisions that involve the following. First, high risk and complexity. So what kind of guidelines are available for decision making? And so they have outlined here some of the basics for how that's going to be determined. So for the first level here, I know this is hard to read, few decisions are required, work is performed according to standard procedures, and basically what that's saying is that really decisions don't have to be made very often. So we're not going to be paying that person very much. Non-complex, right? You just follow the standards. And then all the way down to number 6, few guidelines are available. The incumbent may consult with technical experts and review relevant professional publications. Decisions require innovation and creativity. Basically, this is a complex environment that doesn't lend many guidelines to the incumbent to guide the decision-making process. So we're going to say that's a high risk and complexity in terms of decision-making. Second, people who are paid more are going to be making decisions that involve high impact on the org. So number 1 here, inappropriate decisions, recommendations, or errors would normally cause minor delays or cost increments. Okay, so if you screw it up, basically the org doesn't pay. And so that means that you don't have a lot of real stake in how the org in the success of the org. Basically, you can mess up and it's going to be fine. So those jobs were not going to pay as much. However, down at number 5, inappropriate decisions, recommendations could affect attainment of objectives for the company and would normally affect long-term growth and even public image. So basically, if you mess up, you are going to really cause some harm to the org, and therefore you should be paid more for making better decisions in that case, because there's more at stake. And finally, we're going to reward decisions that have long periods of time before the impacts of the decision are known. So here it says the effectiveness of majority of a position's decisions can be measured within 1 day to 1 year. And so or more than a year, number 6. So we're going to reward or compensate people for making decisions where we don't know the result for a longer period of time. And basically that's because those kind of decisions are harder to make, and we want people who do those well, and that's just harder. It's harder to make decisions when you don't see the results for a long period of time. Okay, how many compensable factors should we generate? Well, we want to avoid overlapping factors, so problem solving and critical thinking are probably too overlapping to make them to warrant two separate factors. There's a challenge with this, and that is that if there's just one position in the org and it's not filled by many incumbents, but it involves something rare, like and salient, I would say, like potentially unsafe working conditions or something that requires an odd behavior. I can't think of a really example at this point, but the authors of the book note that there may be pressure to make this a compensable factor, like unsafe working conditions. And they say to try to avoid doing that. If there aren't many people, if there's only one position in the org and it's not filled by many people, then it probably shouldn't be a compensable factor. Compensable factor needs to span multiple positions across the org. Empirical guidance. So I don't remember the citations of where they found this, but you can look in the book if you like. But they were saying that parsimony is always good because in the empirical evidence that they found, basically if you have 21 factors or a lot of different factors, the same final pay structure, it kind of shakes down the same way in terms of the final product than a system with just 3 to 7 factors. So stick to 3 to 7 if at all possible. Okay, so here's an example of a compensable factor, and it's multinational responsibilities. And so again, here's the definition. This factor concerns multinational scope of the job. Multinational responsibilities are defined as blah blah, managerial activities in 1 or more countries. And there are 3 dimensions for this factor. First, the level of multinational responsibilities, and that's this one here. And I'll let you read that at your leisure. Time spent on multinational issues, with more pay probably devoted to those who spend more time on this. And finally, number of countries that the position is responsible for. again, with more pay allocated to those who are tending to more countries than others. Right? So we're going to pay people based on those things. Okay, then we scale the factors. So for each factor, this one we have compensable factor titled knowledge. And this factor measures knowledge or equivalent training, blah, blah. And we have first degree all the way to fifth degree. And the first degree is we have relatively little knowledge is needed. We have some things that require knowledge, but we're going to scale all the way up. And there's this recommendation to use 4 to 6 degrees when scaling. This one uses 5. And I believe the organization used in this example is a National Metals Trades Association, just so you know that that's what they're talking about in the different categories here. Okay, all this matters coming up. It's all going to come together. Okay, step 4. After we have scaled the factors and come up with the degrees that the factors is needed for the position, we're going to weight the factors according to the importance for each job. Okay, so for each job, how much do you need knowledge? How much do you need decision making? How much do you need multinational competence? And this is going to be, again, guided by the org's mission, as all the things we're doing in HR. Determine the factor weights. Okay, so we want to assign out of 100%, meaning the total content domain of this position, how much goes to which compensable factor. So we have the compensable factor of decision making. And let's say for job X, we need 50%. So this is a high decision making. You spend about 50% of your time, effort, goes to that, and we want to reward people based on that, and 30% goes to knowledge and 20% goes to persuasion skills. So these add up to 100%, and we have that breakdown. All right, so after we scale and weight, we have finally the final analysis here. And again, let's zoom out because we're getting kind of into the details a little bit. But we want to determine a pay structure. So we have 100 positions and benchmark jobs in the company, and we're trying to make sure we get the one that's most valuable to the org because we want to compensate that one the most, and then second most valuable, and third, and on down the line. And we want to do it in a way that's scientific and rigorous and is legally defensible. And so here we have a certain position, bookstore manager. And the compensable factors, you can see their breakdown here. We have skill as 40% of the job, effort 30%, responsibility and working conditions on down the line. And for each one, because we've scaled them and we've weighted them, the degree here represents the extent to which the job requires this particular factor. And notice that they've made it even more complicated in this case because each compensable factor is broken down into different categories. So we have mental skill and experience skill. We have physical effort and mental effort, and responsibility, effective error, and then inventiveness and innovation. And so that's what this is over here. The weights, if we add these together, equal this 20%. Does that make sense? I hope it does. If you add these 15% together, that will equal 30. So that's how it's broken down. And so the degree is the extent to which the job requires this, because you've done your scaling. Remember the scaling back here in slide 17. Scale the factors for each position so we know that what the position entails as far as that factor. So for mental skill, for this particular position, it's going to be a 4. We need 4 on that one, but 3 on the experience skill. For physical effort, bookstore manager doesn't really have a lot of physical effort, so it's a 2, but mental effort is a 4. And so on down. See here working conditions, 10% of the job entails that, and we have the degree to which it matters is not very much. So the bookstore manager isn't really facing any kind of workplace difficulties in that sense. All right, so the way that we get this total then is we take the degree 4 and multiply it by 20, and that gives us 80. We take this 3 and multiply it by 20, it gives us 60. And this is 2 for the physical effort, multiply it by 15 and we get 30, and so on down the line. And then we add all those together at the end and we get, voila, the final number, which is the whole point of what we've been doing, 310. So that we did all of these steps to get to this 310. And we will have one of these final numbers corresponding to each position, and then we will rank order them and set pay from there. So that summarizes the point method. Step 5 of JE is to communicate the plan and train any users. So this means you're going to be making manuals and documenting your process, making sure everything is clear to people so they know how their pay has been determined. Sometimes this should include appeals process. I don't think all orgs have this, but of course Milkovic and Newman, the authors, talk about this is something that should not be neglected for the organization, that buy-in is critical for people to accept this. Just from my experience and listening to consultants and people in HR, however, if you believe that everybody's going to buy into any given plan, you may be in for a little bit of a surprise. But that's not to say that we don't try and, of course, do what we can. Okay. Let's see, we're getting to the end here. Step 6, we go to the non-benchmark jobs and apply the same process. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so comparison of the job evaluation methods. Here's where we can get into some of the empirical data that has been done on job evaluation. And I would say that in IO, we don't give as much emphasis to this. It's more in the business literature. Academy of Management, I think, has some research on this. Different job of one thing I should say that empirical research has shown, just as a general trend, is that different JE techniques generate different kinds of pay structures. And so job analysis, we've seen the same thing with that. Sanchez and Levine talk about this. And there's just a lack of agreement among SMEs in terms of the relative value of any given position to the organization's success. So really it's a value judgment of who should be paid more, truly. For example, I have here at the notes at the bottom of the slide, who determines that Bree should make less than the professors? Is her job less valuable to the org? I would say her job in some ways is more valuable to the org, or at least on the same level. And if it's valued less, then how much less and why? And so that's what we see with job evaluation, is it's that value, we can't get away from the value judgments surrounding these techniques. Also, jobs that are chosen as benchmarks are often male-dominated roles. So there's some more empirical work on this, and basically it makes the jobs that are characterized by women less important and therefore paid less. And so we see some of this in just the overall pay disparities across gender. Which method should we rely on? Well, experts don't agree, but the method, we do know from empirical research that the method does determine the results, and the value judgments we make do matter in terms of setting pay structures. Who should be involved in the process? Managers, employees, anybody basically who has a stake in the results. Getting unions involved is very important, and designing the process matters for fairness, trust, and whenever issues of pay come up, and we'll talk about in class about pay transparency, it's a sensitive matter, and so that's good to keep in mind. In HR, I think that's why HR is one of the more difficult jobs to have, is just because of all of these matters. And as we know, people have differing viewpoints. Depending on which position you inhabit in the org, you're going to be coming at things with your own unique lenses. And again, those value judgments, people won't always agree. So, all right, the final result of job analysis is we get a job description. And we get those task statements, we get a list of skills that are needed by the incumbent who comes into this role. Those are the results of a JA. But for the results of a JE, slightly different. We get a structure or hierarchy of the work. We get what is more valuable to the org versus less valuable. We get a determination of different positions' worth to the organization. We get a starting point for base pay structure, and just kind of basically we get something that people are going to be referring to over time in order to make decisions about people's pay and promotion. And these are important matters to at least have some idea of how it's done and the different decision points along the way in the process. Okay, well, that is all I wanted to present on this. I would say, you know, the main nuggets: know about ranking, know about classification, know about the point method, understand what compensable factors are, and the overall purpose of JE, especially as it is distinguished from the overall purpose and process of JA. All right, thank you, and I'll see you in class.